As a teenager, I would write every day, probably 2 or 3 songs, and just hang out, and that was a wonderful thing. And as you get older, I find anyway, it takes longer for the songwriter to appear in the room. But then once he does appear, he's a nuisance, and he won't leave me alone. And at the present time, I'm enjoying his company, let's say.
Dystopia tonight. Dystopia tonight.
Hey.
How are you, man?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. It's it's one of the things I wanted to ask you right off the top, because it's just one of those things that I've noticed immediately. You guys were always unabashedly British, by the way. You know what I mean? Like in the greatest way possible. And I know that you had to change some lyrics in some songs, and I wonder if, like, specifically Black Coffee, I believe too, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that you got a lot of flack for? Because I feel like you had a lot of British slang in your music, which a lot of people love, especially Americans who like love the band. But I know that there's something going on back there where they wanted you to change some stuff around.
Well, on British television, there was a program called Top of the Pops. We had to change the lyrics in a song called Call for Cats. And in America, there was a couple of changes, like on the song Goodbye Girl, we had to change the word lino. But, because we're British, we speak with a British tongue, or at least we were definitely singing with a British tongue in those days.
Mm-hmm. Did you kind of hate having to change that stuff around, or were you all right with it?
That didn't faze me. I think the only thing that annoyed me about Black Coffee in Bed was the record company edited it down to get it on the radio, but they didn't run it past us. They just cut it up and then put it on, which was kind of weird, but that was back in the day.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, I think for a lot of people, that was one of the appeals of listening to Squeeze. You know what I mean? Like you were hearing stuff you'd never heard before.
Yeah.
Also thrown into a song and sung into lyrics and kind of mixed in. So I don't know. I feel like it made you feel kind of cool. You were like, I'm in it. I get it. I'm part of it.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, how many years have we been doing it? It's extraordinary, really. I'm very proud.
That's awesome. Did you always want to be a musician? And did that start when you were younger?
Yeah, I was at school, and history, geography, stuff like that wasn't really my cup of tea, so to speak. I had a really great art teacher, and she was enthusiastic about music, so she'd bring records in, and she enthused me to listen to music, and then eventually to pick up a bass guitar and join a band or form a band. That was way before Squeeze, of course.
Is that what you want? Did you always want to be in a band, or did you feel like you wanted to do solo stuff first? Like, what was?
No, I always wanted to be in a band because I lived on a what's called a council estate here in the UK, and it was always like a gang of boys. That was the most important thing. And so to be in a band, like the Small Faces, the Kinks, the Beatles, the Stones, that's a gang of boys. Having a great time, touring the world, drinking, having fun. That was it.
That's awesome. It's cool to be able to start out with a collaborative feeling, because I feel like a lot of people sometimes have to get used to it and they don't know how to work with it.
Yeah, well, it's a collective ambition when everybody's young and they're all in a band. Everybody's in a band. You all want to head off in the same. You want the same route.
Right. Yeah, it always slightly made me jealous as a comic, because I would see people in a band or even like improv groups. They had each other's backs, and you're not necessarily alone on stage all the time. So when stuff goes wrong, you can be like, right, guys? But when you're a comic, you're kind of like, it's just me.
Yeah.
and I'm the idiot here. It's all on me.
Do you stay tight with those band members? Because I have a friend that when we were younger would always say he was just lucky enough to be swept up into almost being like always part of an entourage. But his friends that he grew up with were never with him. So it was like, it's not as much fun as if you're sharing it with somebody and you can share those memories for years to come. So do you stay tight with the guys that you came up with that same gang of boys, or not as much?
Yeah, I suppose I do, from time to time. Yeah, I suppose it's good to keep connected to people who gave you the ability to become who you are. They're really important people, and for better or for worse, it's part of your journey. It's a part of a loving thing. So yeah, to keep in contact is very important.
I feel like over the pandemic, people wound up reaching out and keeping in touch with people that they hadn't seen or talked to in a while, just because of the necessity to, like, reach out to anybody.
Yeah.
Was that what was it? What was it kind of like for you in that respect?
Well, it took me ages to find any inspiration, but when I did find it, I was writing about my teenage years, and I was writing songs about my friends and maybe what had happened to them. So I wrote a whole bunch of songs about all the characters that I used to hang out with, and then I imagined what they were doing now. So
Nice.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
That's really cool. That's a good way to keep busy. I mean, I feel like everybody kind of found a different way to create or do something new, or.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I also ran a whole bunch of songwriting workshops on Zoom. So every other week, I'd have 15 writers,
Mhm.
and we'd spend 4 or 5 days pushing the boat out and trying different things. And all these writers were locked down with no stages to play on, and a lot of them were having lots of doubts about what they were doing, and really it was just very encouraging to have people give themselves.
Yeah. Did you find that you embraced the live streaming aspect of it right away, or did it take some time?
Absolutely. It was my route out of this room.
Yeah.
And long may it be, because it's a great format. I did a songwriting workshop just this weekend, and it was hugely successful. I think that the element of using this kind of streaming, it can bring people together without them having to go very far, and it keeps people safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, I feel like, especially for a collaborative sense too, is there's really no excuse to not see any, you know what I mean? Like normally,
Mhm.
it'd be like, oh, but the drive and I don't have the
Mm.
time or the distance or whatever. And now it's like, hey, can you be in your office in your bedroom at
Mm.
6? And you're like, yeah, I
Mhm.
guess. I have no
Absolutely.
excuse to be lazy at this point.
Yeah.
Um, have you noticed any change in your writing process versus maybe when you started to now to collaborating again during the pandemic?
Well, as a teenager, I would write every day, probably 2 or 3 songs, and just hang out, and that was a wonderful thing. And as you get older, I find anyway, it takes longer for the songwriter to appear in the room. But then once he does appear, he's a nuisance, and he won't leave me alone. And at the present time, I'm enjoying his company, let's say.
Nice.
Excellent.
I never thought of putting it that way, with like somebody else in the room when you're trying to be creative, because there are those times where you're like, I really need to work on something, and that guy is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm like, could you at least let me know when you're gonna check out so I don't waste my time?
sure, that's
Yeah.
him.
Do you find that you write more lyrically first or musically first?
Well, I'm a lyricist primarily, so
Mhm.
that's what I do. I write lyrics and I send them to people who I'm working with. And sometimes people send me titles or ideas, and that gets me excited. And then I sit in this room and I start to work.
Nice. Yeah, I'm always amazed by musicians, because a lot of times, even people who consider themselves strictly lyricists will be like, yeah, sometimes I just hear a tune in my head, or I wake up with something in the morning and then start to write to that tune. And I always wished, because that's not how I write at all either, and I'm not musically inclined at all. But I mean, that'd be
Yeah,
amazing to just all of a sudden have something pop into your head.
yeah,
I've
And
woken
then
up with a random tune in my head, but it's usually like a cartoon melody from
yeah,
so many
yeah,
years ago,
I was
and I
gonna
just
say,
start
yeah,
singing it throughout the day.
yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
just
The
like wake me.
earworm.
Wake Me Up Before You Go by Wham just pops into my head randomly, and I'm just like, that's
Oh
never leaving.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this is
mine,
great.
my earworm this morning was My Boy Lollipop, which
Oh
was
my
really great.
God.
Yeah.
That so by Benny Pearl. That's I have a weird story about that. I'm high school driving around with a bunch of my friends in my car, and I've got music playing. And at the time, Napster was like really popular, all their stuff. And my mom had just become aware of it, so of course she's like, show me how to use it, whatever. So I downloaded a bunch of songs for her that she liked, and My Boy Lollipop was one of them. It's
All right.
somehow, yeah, and it's a great song, but not when you're riding around with your dude friends, going to another town. And it seeped into my playlist.
Yeah.
we're listening to all our music. It's blasting in the car, and then out of the blue, My Boy Lollipop starts playing, and automatically they just look at me, and they're like, "What is this?" And I'm just like,
Yeah.
"It's not my song, I swear to God." And they're like, "Sure, it's not." And I was like, "No, but it's a great song." That was a weird story, but
Yeah, it was a little bit weird.
yeah, we'll move past
I
it.
liked it though. I liked it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. Try to be
I think
vulnerable.
that's how most people feel about our podcast. It was a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah.
weird, but I liked it.
But yeah, that's a great song to wake up to. Did you have were you inspired by anybody in particular when you started out? But like when you were in the band with your group of friends, anybody that like stuck out to you?
Well, there's many. The Who, the Velvet Underground, Iggy and the Stooges, because it was just like a racket, and I thought, well, if they can make a racket, so can I. There was lots of different things, but then on the other side of the coin, there would be James Taylor and Joni Mitchell, so there was a balance.
Right. Was there anybody that you? Because I feel like a lot of people kind of emulate somebody in the beginning. Was there anybody that you kind of had to shake out of your head, where like, okay, I'm being a little too much like this. Let me try to find my own voice.
Well, because of my deep tones, I used to sound like Lou Reed a lot in the early days, and I don't mind that because he's a great person to mimic in a way.
Yeah.
And it's my voice, and I can't change it. I can't sing like other people, so I just have to sing like me.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there more? Would you say like the British invasion kind of influenced you a bit? Like, did you feel like you had to get to America at a certain point, or that wasn't in your vision at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's in every band's vision to go to America. And I remember the first time coming to the States, and we toured for like a couple of months in the back of a Chevy van, and it was a great education for us. We went to places where you wouldn't really normally go to play shows, and we learned a lot. It was just a fun time. It was a really fun time.
Do you remember like your wildest kind of tour memory in that van? Like anything crazy happened in the Chevy van?
Every day. I mean, every day it was chaos. But we would, like, for instance, we went to Dallas, and we turned up at the gig. I think it was called the Longhorn Ballroom.
Okay.
And there was chicken wire across the stage, and I said to the guy around the place, "Why is there chicken wire?" And he said, "Because they ain't gonna like you."
Wow, that must be fun to play. Did you guys were like this is gonna be nuts, or did you like do your stuff and stay calm?
Well, we just played, and people threw things at us, and it was amazing.
That's incredible. Is it when you get to a certain point where you're like super successful, do you think back to times like that and you're like, I kind of wish we had the chicken wire?
Well, I mean, we were in Dallas just recently, and I remembered that vividly. But this time we were on a massive stage with Hall & Oates, and
right.
I was thinking that's some journey from behind the chicken wire to 15,000 people.
Yeah. That's a great title for a book, by the way. Behind the Chicken Wire to 15,000 people.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That would be amazing. I would read that in a heartbeat. Did you ever get starstruck? Were you a type to get starstruck easily, like by people you had met on the road and stuff?
No, I don't think so. I just figured that we were all in the same boat together in some ways.
You know what's crazy? It is very much like that. One of my friends used to describe show business as we're all in the same boat. It's just that some of us don't have to row as hard as the others.
There you go.
And I'd be like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. Was there anybody when you were younger where you were like, I really want to work with this person, and then got to, and it was kind of mind blowing?
Well, the first album was produced by John Cale, and I didn't think, oh, I'd love to work with him, but we ended up working with him. And of course, being a huge Velvet Underground fan, it was a massive buzz to be in a studio with such a creative mind.
Right. Any like differences of because I know like sometimes, especially during this pandemic, a lot of artists have been like, it was great. It was great being able to do an album that wasn't really produced by anybody with anybody looking over your shoulder. Did you find any kind of conflict back in the day with producers or how you wanted your album to sound and versus?
No, not me personally. I enjoy having a producer on board because it's like a sounding board. It's somebody you can sit with and debate ideas and you pull out the best of the song, I think.
Right.
So, when we went in the studio with Elvis Costello, it was a massive buzz again, but it was also a very creative time because he was at the peak of his career at that then.
When you were doing like your songwriting and stuff like that, especially with somebody like who was at their peak, did you guys collaborate in a way where you felt like you could give somebody input? Like how do you get to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm gonna lend a lyric here? Is it as collaborative between other musicians where you're like, hey, you know what, I think this song would be great if you added this in there or whatever, or do you all kind of stay to yourselves at that point?
Well, with Squeeze originally, we would all have our part to play. I think most bands are like that. It's a democratic, virtually a democratic sort of setup, if you like. And those are the kind of bands that I like to be around when it's kind of when it's like a game of football. Everybody's wants to kick the ball in the same direction.
Mm-hmm.
You want to score the goal, so it works very, very well.
That's awesome. Were your parents cool with you going out like as young as you were back in the day? Were they fine with the music thing? Did they get it?
Not really. No, my parents were dead against it. They thought it was not the rob. It was important to have a job to lean back on, a trade, as they said in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really have one, so I just had to leave home and get on with what I wanted to do. So I left home, found a friend to live with, and then dropped out, I suppose, and then just became that guy who wrote lyrics.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's nice.
When did your parents, did they ever, or when did they like first embrace it? Like, okay, this is a career, we get it.
Well, once we'd been on television a few times and we were starting to play to larger audiences than just a few people in the pub, then they sort of saw it as being something that may just have a future.
He may be onto something here. What was the point where you felt like you had a future?
Oh, from the very first day. I mean, I was singly minded into what I wanted to do, and still am. I wake up every morning thinking, well, I want to have a record. I want to have a tour. I would like to have all of those things in the modern world.
Yeah. That's awesome that you had it when you were younger, because I feel like sometimes it does take people a while to solidify who they are. And I remember, even for me, like, when I started doing stand-up, it was still kind of one of those things where like, am I making the right choice? But once I finally realized, yeah, this is the only choice.
Yeah.
It felt so much better.
Of course. Yeah. It's like, this is who you are.
Yep. Absolutely.
Do you ever have the days though? Like, not now because you're well established, but did you ever have the days where you're like, I should have just been a police officer? Like,
no, I never had that thought.
Is there ever like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on today, obviously politically and all that other stuff too. Were you guys passionate about that kind of stuff back in the day, about making sure stuff got into your lyrics? Was it, because I feel like a lot of artists today have, the impetus to say something, to speak out, and it's kind of like it was a little bit back in the day, but I'm not sure. I think it's heavier now for some reason. Could just be because I'm young and I have no idea, but like, you know what I mean?
I've never had the longing to write politically minded songs because I don't have the knowledge of what to say.
Right.
And also, once you've said something, it becomes dated extremely quickly because politics and the world moves so quickly,
Right.
much quicker than it's ever done. So I don't think my audience, my personal audience as a solo artist, they want to hear the positive stories. They want to hear stories that reflect maybe their own life. If they want to hear about things that are going on in a political sense, they can just pick up a newspaper or read it on the news.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it too. Do you feel any particular way about the stuff that's going on now with like Spotify and the artists kind of pull, like Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, you had mentioned before, they're pulling their music off of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's great because they can do that as a smaller footprint artist. I don't think they'd be that bothered. It wouldn't make much of a deal for them. But what is interesting is a lot of people are selling their stock back to their record companies. And today, even I was reading that Sting has sold his catalog back to Universal.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think as you get to a certain age, you think, well, actually, I'm never going to own this stuff. It's always going to belong to them. So they may as well buy the other half off of me and they can keep it.
Right. Would you ever do something like that?
Well, when I was read Sting's interview today about it, it made perfect sense to me. It's like they're never going to give us the rights completely to look after our own music.
Right.
So it's always going to be choked, suffocated in some sort of, they're not that bothered about it.
Right. So good.
But if they owned it, maybe they would be.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the way all of it works too, because there's somebody explained it to me where it's like, yeah, they sold their music. 'Cause like Springsteen just did that, but apparently they still have some level of control over it where they could say where they want it to go, which doesn't make any sense. Because it was basically like, if he wanted to pull out of something like a Spotify, he could, because there's probably like a clause in his contract that still says he can do what he wants with it. That fascinates the hell out of me, because I assumed if you sold your stuff, you've got no more control over it. But I don't know how.
It depends how you word the deal. I think everybody's different.
Right.
You can cut the cloth accordingly depending on how much leverage you have as a artist. And of course, somebody like Sting or Bruce Springsteen can sit down with the heads of those record companies and do the deal that is good for them. Somebody like myself, if I sat down with the head of Universal, they wouldn't know who the fuck I was. So, it would be hard to try and get a deal.
Right.
Yeah.
On the same line, are you protective about your songs in a way, like are you flattered when you hear a cover of them? Do you like that kind of stuff, or are you like, it's supposed to be sung this way?
I'm flattered completely.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like people couldn't be anything but flattered, but I've talked to a few people who are very much like, I'm very strict about exactly the way it sounds.
I think that comes down to because music and spoken word are the type of art form where it's yours and it comes from your soul, but it's not something that's tangible that you could sell like a painting. Where you're like, okay, once it's gone, this is yours and total and complete. So I think think about it like a joke. Like if you formed a joke and you're like, oh, imitation is the best form of flattery. But if you hear somebody telling you a joke, John, you're going to be like, this hack.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. That's why it's completely different, because I feel like I like covers, and then but sometimes you see something where you're walking around a grocery store and you hear somebody covering a song that you like, and you're like, what the hell did they do? So I always wonder what it's like for the artist in particular.
I also find it's amazing that we as an artist, you can have somebody else own your song is like a piece of your soul. So you can have this company own that piece of you, to the point where we had Chris Smithers, who's a folk singer, sing a song on our cast with us, and it got copyright infringement, and he wasn't allowed to do it because the record company stopped it from being played on our cast because it was too close to the original.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was
right?
wild. Yeah, that was wild. I was like, yeah, I got flagged and we got in trouble.
Yeah.
I was like, but it's him singing it. Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Are you one of those people who do you prefer when you're live singing it to mix it up and play it a little differently?
No, not really. Squeeze is very strict about the way the songs are performed. They're performed pretty much to the way they were recorded. When I venture out as a solo artist, I have to change them because it's just me and a guitar. So I need to transpose the song and make sure that people are engaged in it in a different way. So, I can slow it down, speed it up, whatever I want to do. Whereas when you're in a band, you have to stick to the rule.
Right. I always found it interesting whenever I go to see like a live band, like I went to see the Counting Crows live, and they don't particularly play their songs the same way you hear it on an album. And it's just funny because the audience tries to sing along. And then, Adam Duritz will like change up something and you just see them get like incensed. And I'm just like, oh my God. And like, you can feel the tension because they're like, I was singing with you. He's like, nope. It's always funny to me. Or like, even like, one of my friends went to a Dylan concert, which I know is like, he's everybody knows that he just kind of does what he wants. But they were like, yeah, none of it sounded the same. And they were kind of angry about it. And I was like, but I know people who love going to see the artist interpret the song. Do you feel any particular way? Like when you're listening to a song you love and they change it up, are you like, oh, this is what I like?
It depends who it is. I mean, I don't really have an opinion about that. I think I prefer the originals every time, of course, because that's just the first time that you hear a song. But if somebody's going to change something around, then I'm willing to have a listen.
How did you get into producing music and getting into that stuff? Did that aspect of it appeal to you when you were younger too, or did you kind of grow into it from watching other people kind of do your stuff?
I don't like producing particularly. I don't like being in the studio for very long. I get itchy feet. But I'm working with a band in a couple of weeks' time who are a young bunch of guys, and it'll just be an exciting couple of days just to hear them play and just to be there for them. That's what producing is about. It's just about to be there for the other person, make them feel welcome, make them try and get them to perform the best that they possibly can in that hour.
That's a great way to put it. Because it's always nice to have somebody in your corner, especially somebody with as much wisdom as you have. It just makes anybody starting out feel like they know it, kind of giving them the confidence to know what they're doing.
Yeah, you just hold their hand, basically.
Yeah. Is it something that you like felt better about doing late? Like you said, you had itchy feet. Did you get over that ever? Or do you still feel that kind of way if you're too long in a studio?
Well, I kind of prefer to grab the moment. By being in the studio for too long, you can sometimes lose the moment. Creativity is for me is linked to an emotional soul, and that you can't stretch. It has to be either there or it isn't, for me anyway. So whenever I'm working on something, it has to be within a certain feeling rather than an algorithm.
Wow. One of the things I always wonder too is, as far as the pandemic and everything that's kind of changed, were you somebody who went out to see live music? Like you just said, you're working with a younger band now. How did you stumble upon them? Did they come to you, or do you go out and actively seek it?
No, I never seek anything. I just sit here and wait for something to happen.
I'm never going to be able to picture you leaving that one room. Like, yeah, no, Chris Difford.
No, I seriously don't. I sit here and things happen, and that's how it's meant to be. This is like my church, and people come and people go, and I don't seek. At my age, I'm not interested in seeking stuff apart from there's one thing that eludes me, which I'm going to stop seeking, which is musical theatre. I've been trying to push myself in that direction, educating myself on it, but it becomes more and more elusive the closer you get to it, I think.
Really? Why do you think that is in particular for you?
Because I think it's a very busy thoroughfare. You know, there's lots of people writing musical theatre now. There's stages have got waiting lists because of the pandemic for shows coming into the West End or on Broadway. And also it's about finding the writer, and I haven't been able to find anybody yet that I can sit down with and write.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking out of the blue. Cool for Cats. I don't know if you would you turn that into a musical? Because I feel like that would be insane and a lot of fun. Like, is that the kind of thing?
Not really. I mean, I'd like to work on something new, like, you know, take an old story like The Odd Couple or Groundhog Day, something like that, and just make it into a stage play.
Groundhog Day would be amazing to do. That's like one of my favorite movies of all time.
It's incredible, yeah.
Right? It just, and no matter when, like, I mean, obviously Groundhog Day is when you want to watch it, but like anytime that's on TV, I will stop what I'm doing and I'm like, I gotta watch Bill Murray in this Groundhog.
Yeah.
Was there anything you particularly binged during the pandemic? Something that you like couldn't get away from?
Well, I'd never heard of Curb Your Enthusiasm until the pandemic.
Wow.
And so we went and we watched every one of those. We then watched all the cooking shows on Netflix, and then crime stuff about ice. There was one last week we watched, I the Spy, the Sniper. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's a really
good one.
Yeah, lots of cool stuff.
The crime stuff, I feel like when you're trapped inside, the last thing you want to do is watch 24-hour home invasions, but that's what I did.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and I was like, that's it. Have you seen the one called Evil Genius?
No.
I keep pushing this one. They should pay me.
You do.
I do. It's one of the craziest things. The craziest things about the crime stuff is that, you know, you realize these people are like in your neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, this is, you know, I live in New Jersey and this stuff happened in Pennsylvania. But you have to check it out. It's like 8 episodes. You know, you don't.
I will vouch for it. I watched it. It flew by, and
I made him watch it.
It was amazing to. I don't want to give anything away to you, but it just involves an innocent man robbing a bank. Start it there and go take a look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, out of control.
Cool.
And the craziest thing is, I remember this story when I was in high school because it was a guy that robbed a bank with a bomb, like that was somebody had built that was a collar around his neck. You don't forget that when you're, no matter what age you are. But we had heard about it, and we were just like, whatever. And then years later, they came out with the documentary, and it's so much crazier.
I'm not gonna lie, it might make a pretty sweet musical.
Uh-oh.
I know. Wouldn't that be crazy if that's the thing that sparked it, and you were like, I think I've got my musical.
Every producer's like, this is very original.
Yeah.
It would be, yeah.
He never mentions that he talked to us about it, though. He's like, this is, forget it.
We just see him all over the West End.
There you go.
When you're, is there a particular moment in the maybe like, you know, middle of everything that was going on where you had to like basically like, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life, like on stage working with somebody you love, or just a particular moment with the band that you were like, this is going to be something I remember forever?
Yeah, I suppose so. On the Hall & Oates tour last year, playing Hollywood Bowl, that was pretty extraordinary. Wow. Being on stage, that was very emotional. But equally, at the beginning of that tour, we played Madison Square Garden, and that was before. There's 2 days before the pandemic really hit. We'd heard about it on the news, but so to do that show was very emotional because we flew back the next day, and that was the end of that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I feel like everybody was in a weird position when this thing hit, and they were either just coming up with something. Did you feel like it was going to end shorter than you thought it was, and you were like, we'll be fine, we'll be back on tour, or did you have a sense that this is going to be a while?
I had a sense it would be a while. It just reading between the lines, it just seemed like this is a bug that's going to be around for us, and it's not over. It's still here. So,
Yep.
Even though here in the UK they're dropping all the restrictions in a couple of weeks' time, there's still variants coming in from Africa and places like that. So.
Yeah, it's the same thing here where we have a bunch of people, like I had a bunch of gigs canceled, rightfully so, in January because of Omicron. But there's still comedy club owners or venue owners that are like, no, everything's fine here. And I'm like, what? Like, no, it's not. And you kind of have to do the right thing, and bite the bullet. But yeah, that's the worst part. When you see people that are like artists that are speaking out in a way, like, I mean, I think Eric Clapton kind of surprised me a little bit with his stance on the whole thing. But do you feel like that's just part of the PTSD of the pandemic where people are like not ready to, they're not fully embracing what's going on around them?
I don't have an answer really. I think everybody's entitled to their view. It might be the wrong one, but it's not for me to comment on Eric Clapton or Van Morrison or anybody who else who's had a different view on stuff. When they make comments like that, I don't listen.
That's probably the best route to take. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's just I feel like a lot of people that I know too, like artists in general, were either like, if they're not on stage, they don't know their own value. You know what I mean? Not that they don't know their own value, but it's just so intrinsically part of the performance thing that they'll do anything to get back on. Did you find that struggle frustrating for you, where you were like, okay, it's day whatever, I need to sing, I need to be out there? Like, what did you do to kind of cope with that?
I wasn't bothered. I just wanted it to go on and on and on.
Wow.
I don't mean that flippantly.
No, I know you. Yeah.
I mean, I enjoyed the freedom of being at home and not having to worry about stuff like that. And I'm very lucky because I got to work on my podcast and I got to work with students on songwriting, sitting in this room. I did Zoom shows every Saturday to raise money for different charities. And so I was always busy, and that kept my mind ticking over, and that was important.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like we talked about it a few times on this show, but basically, if you have to find a silver lining, it's that level of like creativity that kind of came out of it from having to exercise different muscles or being able to do Zoom shows or, anything like that. So I don't know, a lot of bad shit happened, but a lot of good came out of it too.
Absolutely.
Let me ask, what is so now I know music is your preferred art form to express, but do you have one that you prefer to take in to relax? Like that is like just for your pleasure, like cinema or comedians or anything of that nature?
Well, I enjoy jazz music from the 60s and 50s, and it's kind of music that I never really listened to growing up, and I find it very relaxing to listen to. I don't really get a lot of time to sit and indulge myself in that kind of way. It's different from week to week, from day to day, really, what I like to, I'm trying to be a writer. I'm trying to do my podcast. I'm trying to, work on songwriting. So that takes up a lot of time. When I relax, it's normally when I just hit the pillow.
Yeah. I love the podcast, by the way. What was the impetus to kind of start doing that? Was it the, pandemic? Do you actually enjoy diving into another creative art form in that way?
Well, working with Help Musicians, which is a UK charity, I went to them and said, look, why don't we do a podcast? And that way we can kind of get people like Sting to talk about what it's like for them. And then people at the other end of the pier who, who haven't got any money, who are living in the dark and don't have a stage to play on, might draw some inspiration from these conversations. And that's how it began. And it was to shine a light on the charity, not on me and not on my guest. And so The first series was extremely popular. I really enjoyed doing it. The second series we're working on now, and it's a little bit tougher to get guests because the people are back at work, I guess. But I keep dreaming and I keep knocking on the doors.
Nice. Is there somebody that you really want to get that you haven't gotten yet?
Yeah, I keep knocking on Taylor Swift's door because I really respect the fact that she stands up for herself in the music world. I think it's really important. I know a little bit about her family and her background. We actually share the same bus driver for a while in America.
Wow.
So, but she just seems like a really lovely lady, and I think whatever people have an opinion of her, she does write terrific songs.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's undeniable, and I never understand the pushback she gets. It's just like a weird internet thing where people have their like teams and they want to, they're like, yeah, you're either for or against. And it's so weird. It's like, I feel like everybody can find one song from at least one artist that they like. Like that's what I've always felt like. Maybe they're not your cup of tea, but there's one song out of a whole catalog,
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I hope you get her, man.
Thanks.
What was the, like, for listening to new music, is it something that you do naturally? You know what I mean? Like, is it something like you'll turn on a particular radio station or, maybe pop in an app and be like, I want to see what's the top 40. Do you do that kind of thing?
No.
Because like, how do you find somebody, like if you're looking for a new guest or something like that you've never heard, is it recommendation, word of mouth from friends?
Again, it's just sitting in the room here and waiting for ideas to come and people to knock on the door. A couple of weeks ago, somebody introduced me to Swiss Beats, who I didn't really know anything about. And then 2 days later, I'm doing a Zoom call with him and I have no idea who he is. And it was embarrassing to find out that he's sold millions and millions of albums and produced loads of things. But, we had lots of things in common and he was very giving. He gave up a whole hour of his time. It was lovely.
That's awesome.
Really nice.
Those connections that's the thing that's cool about, again, silver lining is people who are willing to talk and share their experience and stories and stuff like that you maybe would never get to talk to otherwise. Like, again, like I appreciate you coming on immensely because otherwise, I'm not in England. You're not, I don't think you're coming to Jersey anytime soon. I feel like, by the way, I feel like most people who tour, they're always like New York, Philly, Los Angeles. And I'm like, Jersey, nothing. Nobody wants to come to Jersey. I mean, I get it. I don't want to live here either, but holy shit. Come out once in a while.
Even when they play the Meadowlands, they still say they're in New York. So
I know they
John,
do.
You're not going to win.
That's the other thing I've noticed too. They're like, don't ever mention New Jersey. Is there a particular place that you loved going to tour when you were out with Squeeze and stuff? Like a favorite spot that you look forward to hitting every year?
Trenton.
Thank you. That is the soundbite we were looking for. Imagine the Trentonian just runs that exclusively. They're like, finally, a musician loves us. That's great. I mean, there's like a million places I feel like bands like get to tour and go around and stuff like that. It's got to be hard to pick one particular place. Have you ever forgotten where you were when you were on tour, where you get on stage and you're like, hello, and then they're like,
no, never. I'm always trying to be aware of where I am, but it's on our early date sheets. We played in New Jersey so many times.
Nice.
And there was like I can't remember the name of it now, but there was a club just through the tunnel that was run by an Italian family, and we played there quite a few times. It was a really big place for us. Playing in the suburbs is very important because, especially these days, because families don't want to travel, right. So they don't want to go into New York. So I'd rather come to the Count Basie Theater in New Jersey and play there. And then people don't have to come too far. They can have something to eat and see the show. you know, and for us, it's just like coming through the tunnel. So if we're staying there, so yeah, I'm a big fan of the suburbs of America.
Nice. That's a great way to put it too, because just I don't know, especially for comedians, like we love smaller venues. I don't know why. There's the intimacy of I feel like 200 seats is pretty great. You know what I mean? You can play at theaters, you can play bigger venues, stuff like that, but there's something about a low ceiling and a dark room and just a couple hundred people. It's pretty sweet.
Good.
Did you ever have any like fan interactions where you thought it was a little scary? Like people like, when you guys were like really big, like where you're like, okay, this is getting a little intense.
Yeah, of course we had a few of those, but that's all part of the journey, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you have a routine, like a ritual? Would you do like when you hit a new town? Did you tend to look for like a restaurant or a diner or a dive bar or something that would almost make you feel at home, where you would go do that pre or post show? Because I know you only have a limited time there. So
yeah, I mean, we normally shake up in a bus at like 7 a.m. outside of the theater, and the first thing you want is a good breakfast. So we Google like the best breakfast, and then we Uber over to wherever that diner happens to be.
Yeah.
So that's always a good way to start the day. But I'm open-minded about places to eat in America, and I just see what happens.
That's cool. It's a great way to look at it. I always wanted to make this app. We've talked about this before for people, who travel, who do road gigs, who do any of that kind of stuff, to mark down their favorite places to eat so that people can see where they are, on a map. And then I thought, that's probably a horrible way for a stalker to find you. So maybe not the best idea.
Yeah.
We just ate here. And they're like, all right, he's in Trenton.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, that was because I love word of mouth, finding places to eat and places that you love to like spend time on the road. Is there any particular activity that you like doing, or are you like a gig, hotel, home kind of person?
That's it. I did all the museums on early tours.
Nice.
I enjoyed that, and the older I get, the more I want to relax between show and travel, because traveling can be quite stressful, believe it or not, on a bus. And so I like to just try and find my own space, my own time. And really, it's the most important bit is just the bit where you walk from the dressing room to the stage and then back again.
Another good title for a book. You're pumping them out tonight. There's again, being out on the road, going from different places. I always liked small towns. You're talking about suburbs. They seem to have like great vintage stores. I learned early on, like on the road, and I would go pick up records from, every town. I would always let myself buy like a couple records from every town I was in.
Yeah.
And different place. Did you have anything like that where you were like, oh, this town has this little knickknack shop or anything like that when you were on the road?
Not me, but other members of the band are kind of really good at that sort of thing. And I don't know. I mean, how many knickknacks do you need? It's kind of like I'm fed up with knickknacks and records. I've had enough of it already.
Right. And now I should probably stop buying them. I'm like, he's got a point. Well, listen, I just wanted to thank you for coming on because this has been just a blast to get to talk.
Thank you very much.
I have 3 questions that we ask every guest. The first one, if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what kind of advice would you give yourself today that would help you?
That's a good question. Be a bit more committal.
That's good advice.
Yeah. Anything in particular that struck that you wanted to be committed to?
Well, I was committed to drinking for many years, but I don't want to go there. But
sure.
I was going to say, you didn't take your own advice; you gave it up.
Yeah, there you go.
That might lead into the next question I have, and is what had to end in your life, good or bad, in order for you to wind up where you are today?
Well, I stopped drinking and taking drugs 30 years ago, and I'm kind of quite adamant that that's a good route. Good for me.
Yeah, congrats, man. That's awesome. And the last question is based on the theme of the show. So if this was a real dystopia and there's a comet coming or aliens or whatever it is, what would be your epic death? How would you want to go out?
Oh, that's a good question too. I think being eaten by an alien.
That's great. I love it. So great, man. Thank you so much for coming on, dude. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Indeed, man. Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Take care, man.
You too.
Bye.
Dystopia tonight.